Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Coleman. I'm Secretary to the College. But while I'm fáilte mór, a Cllr Gael anseo an ucht, go dtí an ócáid tábhachtach seo. I just have a couple of announcements to make initially. In regard to safety issues, we've got 3 exits here on our left and 3 on the right and 2 at the back of the hall. If the alarm does sound, please leave calmly and slowly. The assembly area is in Fellows Square, and please do not re-enter until we all have got the all clear. I'd ask you out of respect to all speakers to turn off any mobile phones or any other mobile devices which could disrupt the forum. I'd also like to bring to your attention that the forum is being filmed and will be on our website and on our social media channels. So by your participation, you're agreeing to take part in that filming. Each of the invited speakers will be permitted to speak for up to 8 minutes, and I will ring a bell after 7 minutes to indicate that that time is almost up. I'd just like briefly to thank a number of people who helped with tonight's event, particularly in the Communications and Marketing Directorate, in the Secretary's Office, and particularly the Senior Lecturer, Dr. Patrick Eoghan. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Provost of Trinity College Dublin, Dr. Patrick Prendergast, who will chair the public forum.
Members of the Oireachtas, ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome to this public forum on the future of Seanad Éireann. Trinity decided to hold this event not because we are taking sides on this issue or because we elect members of the Seanad, but because we believe in providing a public forum on matters of national significance. That has been a major part of our mission for the past 4 centuries. The motion for tonight's debate is that Seanad Éireann should be abolished, and we are holding the debate ahead of this Friday's referendum when we go to the polls to decide between a unicameral or a bicameral legislature for Ireland. I'm delighted to see so many of our own students here. On Wednesday, the students will hold their own debate in the GMB under the auspices of the Historical Society. For our fresher students, Fridays may be the first vote in their adult life. It's a particularly serious vote for the future of this country, and I'm glad that you're taking it seriously. I'm delighted also to see so many of our friends from the local community, such as Betty Ash, and so many members of the general public, because we wanted this to be a public forum and not just an event for our own staff and students. You're all very welcome here. It's appropriate that this public forum is being held in the Edmund Burke Theatre. Burke is one of our greatest graduates, and he was a fearless advocate of justice on the world stage. His courageous example has often been referenced by our own politicians. In 1979, when Des O'Malley was interrupted in a debate in the Dáil, he responded by saying that if Edmund Burke was interrupted as often as one is interrupted here, he would never have been an orator at all. One politician in particular was famous for quoting Burke, and that was the former Fine Gael leader James Dillon. During the second inter-party government, when he was Minister for Agriculture, Dillon was asked about milk costings. His response closed down all discussion because he replied simply, "As I have not to hand a suitable quotation from Edmund Burke with which to reply, I shall not retort." Burke would have approved of this debate tonight. He dedicated his life to public service, and we share those values. In Trinity, we serve the public good through our commitment to education and research, and through wider engagement with the public. So it's right that we provide opportunities for people to exchange ideas on matters of national importance. I mentioned that Trinity has elected members to the Seanad. Trinity has elected 22 different people in total since 1938. And before that, Trinity elected members to Dáil Éireann. And before 1921, to the British House of Commons. And before that again, from 1603 to 1801, Trinity elected MPs to the Irish House of Commons in College Green. So in one sense, we are the oldest constituency in the country. Thank you, Senator. But we did not want this to be a public forum just to focus on the issue of Trinity representation. For this to be a truly national forum, we wanted to look at all the issues. The questions of university representation may be discussed tonight, but we didn't want to make it the sole focus, nor to appear to take a particular side on the question. In 1979, and I actually didn't know this, but in 1979 a referendum was passed by 92% supporting a widening of the franchise to all graduates, and we in Trinity have always wished to see that decision brought into law. It may also seem strange that there are no Trinity senators on the panel, or members of Trinity staff. Now this was a deliberate decision. We invited our guest tonight promising that this would be a public forum facilitated by Trinity, but without Trinity taking a public side. We didn't want to create the impression of favouring one side over the other by inviting speakers from within the university. That said, I welcome our Trinity senators who are attending this event, and I look forward to their contributions from the floor, as indeed I look forward to contributions from all gathered here this evening. Friday's vote is on an issue of fundamental importance to the way our country is run. We should make no mistake about that. It is our democratic right and privilege to be consulted on this issue. Happily, unlike James Dillon and the milk costings, I do have to hand the suitable Burke quotation, which gets across our civic duty. Burke said, "Society is indeed a contract. It is a partnership in all science, a partnership in all art, a partnership in every virtue and in all perfection. As the ends of such a partnership cannot be obtained in many generations, it becomes a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born." All sides believe that the outcome of Friday's vote will indeed influence the kind of society we live in and which our children will live in. We owe it to ourselves and to society to be fully informed and to weigh up all consequences before we decide how to vote on a matter of such fundamental importance. Tonight is Trinity's contribution to that process. I look forward to a stimulating debate which will inform, provoke, challenge, and perhaps even change minds. So again, the motion is that Seanad Éireann should be abolished. Each speaker will make an address of 8 minutes, after which we will open to the floor. Before I open to the floor, we will allow speakers to put questions to each other from opposing teams. Our speakers supporting the motion that Seanad Éireann should be abolished are Eoghan Murphy TD, Fine Gael; Alex White TD, Minister for State and Labour Party Director of Elections for the Seanad Referendum; Matt Carthy, Sinn Fein Councillor and candidate in the forthcoming European elections; Dr. Kevin Rafter, lecturer in DCU representing One House, an independent civil society group calling for a yes vote. And our speakers against the motion that Seanad Éireann should be abolished are Michael McDowell, a senior counsel, former Taoiseach representing Democracy Matters, an independent civil society group calling for a no vote; Lucinda Creighton, Fine Gael TD and Reform Alliance; Jim O'Callaghan, senior counsel, Fianna Fáil councillor and deputy director of elections for Fianna Fáil; Senator Katherine Zappone, co-author of the Seanad Reform Bill 2013. To open the debate, I now call on the first speaker to propose the motion for abolition of Seanad Éireann, Matt Carthy.
Garamaigad Cahirlach agus Garamaigad Cllr as Octan Tarchdom Jesha Larch Ansha Anocht. It's time to abolish the Seanad, and there are a number of reasons why this is so, in my opinion. It is undemocratic. Only a tiny percentage of the population has a say as to who gets elected into the Seanad. It represents an unacceptable inequality between citizens, and it is an affront to democracy. It is elitist. The right to vote in Seanad elections is based in part on educational achievement, and only those citizens who have graduated from a select number of universities are entitled to vote, in addition to city and county councillors and Oireachtas members. It's nothing more than a rubber stamp. The government has an inbuilt majority, and in the last 2.5 years, for example, the Seanad has supported the government on every single occasion. And it's synonymous with cronyism. The Seanad has been used to reward political cronies, most notably by Fianna Fáil during the Bertie Ahern era. In the majority of other cases, a Seanad seat has been a consolation prize for those failing to secure a Dáil seat. As Michael McDowell once put it, it's either a creche or a retirement home. Now, I'm aware that most of you will have a vote for the university panels either now or when you graduate, which of course you all will. But I challenge you to consider if this is right, fair or equal, that your fellow citizens will be denied a vote for a House of Parliament because they have not graduated from a particular university. It harks back, in my opinion, to a time when only those with property had a right to vote. I have 5 votes because I'm a county councillor. That's 5 first preference votes across 5 panels. If you agree with the principle of one person, one vote and universal franchise, then you must vote yes on Friday. And if democracy matters, it matters that the majority of our citizens are excluded from voting from a House of Parliament that seeks to make laws that affect them. Where were those so vocal now in Democracy Matters to stand up for the rights of those who have been for decades denied a vote in Seanad elections? Where were they to argue for the right of the diaspora or citizens in the North to be represented in the Dáil? When exactly did democracy start to matter? This isn't about money. I think, and I've been on record a number of times as saying this, that the government have been wrong to focus on the issue of the cost of the Seanad and also the promise of less politicians. The reality is that the case against the Seanad doesn't need those arguments. There is little value in a chamber that is less about checks and balances and more about rubber stamping government policy. Senators can't even put written questions to ministers. They cannot prevent a bill from being passed into law. They can delay a bill for just 90 days. And the last time the Seanad did this was 1964. It was a pawnbroker's bill, and the Seanad voted against it basically by accident. They cannot delay a money bill at all. So the big argument you're going to hear later on from the opponents of the constitutional referendum is don't abolish it, reform it. But it is ironic that those who argue this point most vociferously now are those who are in the best position to introduce such reforms in recent years. I have yet to hear a coherent explanation from a Fianna Fáil representative or a Green Party representative or what's left in the PDs with Michael McDowell to explain why exactly their parties did nothing to reform the Seanad whenever they had an opportunity. As the Provost rightly said, in 1979, the people of this state voted to extend the franchise for the Seanad by extending the votes to the graduates of other universities. This was a very minimal reform, but despite the people voting overwhelmingly in a referendum, it's never been implemented. It wasn't implemented by Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or Labour when they were in government, and neither was this or any other reform introduced when Michael McDowell was a member of Cabinet. What I remember most about the Fianna Fáil PD governments from 1997 on, and I was a local councillor for almost all of that time, was the ongoing removal of powers from local government and local elected representatives. From waste management to planning to housing, responsibility after responsibility was removed from elected voices and handed over to central agencies and unelected officials. The establishment of the HSE by Michael McDowell finally removed any democratic say in the running of our local health services. Now that's a power grab. And now we hear the claims and promises being made about Seanad Referendum by the exact same parties and individuals who took all those powers whenever they got an opportunity from local government. The promises in relation to the Seanad will never happen. Our newfound champions of reform, Fianna Fáil, who didn't just have one term of government or two or three, but have literally had decades of opportunity to radically alter the shape of the Seanad, chose time and time again to use it as a prop for their own party interests. For Fianna Fáil, the Seanad has always been an instrument of their power. It has never been a check or a balance to it. It was where they provided a political lifeline to former TDs, a reward for cronies and advocates, or provided a platform for aspiring candidates. I would challenge Fianna Fáil to tell us exactly why Eoin Harris was put into the Seanad. Why was Ivor Callally appointed to the Seanad? Why were Chris Wall and Sean Duggan nominated to the Seanad to serve mere weeks as interim or weekend senators? The system of Taoiseach's nominees in particular has been exploited to reward political cronies. One of the most amusing things about those who argue that they now want to see reform rather than abolition of the Seanad is that they cannot seem to agree as to what exactly that reform will entail. I personally have read 4 different reform proposals, all promising different things if the constitutional amendment is defeated on Friday next. So which one are we going to get? Well, in reality, we're going to get none. But what I want to give brief mention is the Cllr Zappone Bill, as it is highlighted as perhaps the type of reform that can be achieved. And however, we need to be clear that while the bill seeks to extend the franchise for Seanad election, and I have to put on the record, it would be better than what's in place, and if it was a choice between what's in place and what's currently there, I would take it. But it does not deal with the elitist constituency for university graduates, which is required under Article 18 of the Constitution. It keeps the vocational panels as required, and it also retains the appointment of 11 members of the Seanad. Political reform of the Dáil and local government is long overdue, but saving a deeply flawed and failed Senate will do nothing to reform politics in this state. The reality is that the proponents of reform are in reality engaging in a last-ditch attempt to save the current Seanad. And no vote will be a vote for no change, no reform. For those who really want a reformed Seanad, they should vote yes on the 4th of October. And if people are really serious about a bicameral system, then my colleagues on my left can put forward proposals for a new chamber that will be put before the people in another plebiscite, and it will be the electorate rather than the politicians who would pass judgment. Let us this Friday have the courage to be radical, to not believe the false promises of reform, and to consign to history one of the last bastions of institutionalised inequality between citizens. I commend the motion to the House. Kllr.
To oppose the motion, Jim O'Callaghan.
Can I start by thanking the Provost and the students of Trinity College for inviting me to address you at this public forum this evening. As the Provost has mentioned to you, this is an important event for Trinity College because for the past 400 years you have provided, not always by election, representatives to the Houses of Legislature that have governed the affairs of this country. You did it in the old Irish House of Commons, you did it when Parliament took its place in London, and you did it when the first Dáil, when one of your most distinguished Provosts, Professor William Thrift, was a TD between the years of 1919 and 1937. So this is an important debate for Trinity College. But no one really suggests, and no one really believes, that the system whereby Trinity College, and indeed my own university, the National University of Ireland, elects 6 senators to the current Seanad is fair or it's correct. I don't believe it's fair or correct, and I don't believe any of you believe it is fair and correct. But there are 2 very easy solutions to that problem. The first solution is that there was the 1979 referendum, which provided that all institutions of third-level education could vote in Seanad elections. That wasn't implemented. My party has primary blame for that. But my party's failure to implement that change, to legislate for a constitutional amendment, does not mean that the institution itself should be abolished. But even if we brought in that change, even if we had a system whereby all graduates of universities could vote, it would still be unfair. And the reason it would still be unfair is because the majority of the population wouldn't have a vote in the election. But that's also a problem that can be resolved readily. We have it through Senator Zappone's draft bill. That only requires a change in the law, not any constitutional amendment, to ensure that every person in this country is given a vote. And what I'm emphasising by those two factors is that, yes, Seanad Éireann has displayed cronyism. Yes, there is elitism there. But that doesn't mean you abolish it. This institution, this university, was an elitist institution up to the 1950s and 60s. Maybe it still is today. Same with my own university. But no one ever suggested that you go out and you abolish Trinity College because it's elitist. Similarly, why would you abolish Seanad Éireann because it's potentially elitist? You don't abolish it, you reform it. And that is something that can be done in legislation, and it is there for people to see. And I hope we get some rational explanation. Rather than Matt's monologue of attacking Fianna Fáil and other people who are in power, can we have a rational explanation from somebody on this side of the House as to why they say reform can't be effected? Because we haven't got any explanation. All we get is that hominem attacks on people or attacks on political parties and saying, sure, we've had talks about reform for years and nothing was done. That's not a reason to do it. And Matt also says, sure, it's like the property, when you needed property to vote. Well, to follow that comparison, it would mean that you would abolish voting. Is that what Matt is really suggesting? You don't abolish voting, you reform the system so that everyone has an entitlement to vote. I want to give you 3 reasons why you should vote no next Friday. And the first of them is that the most important function that this state carries out is the making of laws. We spend billions of money each year enforcing laws in this country, whether it's on Garda Síochána or the Revenue Commissioners or Education Authorities or the Director of Corporate Enforcement. We spend billions enforcing the law. And we do so because it's important that the law is enforced. But surely we must appreciate that we have all these quangos and entities that enforce the law, that we should pay a bit of concentration and spend some money on the making of laws. The making of laws affects the lives of every person in this country. It can imprison you, it can tax you, criminalise you, it regulates your behaviour. It is the most important process carried out by the state. And what we have in this country at present is we have a simple system of making laws. Laws must be passed by the Dáil, and then they must be passed by the Seanad, and then they must be signed by the President. Unfortunately, on our system, and you can blame whoever you want for it, but in the Dáil at present, TDs vote based on their affiliation to the government or to the opposition. TDs do not give sufficient concentration and attention to legislation. They don't do it because if they're government TDs and they vote against it, they end up being sent to Coventry like Lucinda Creighton. And the same would happen with opposition TDs. If you're an opposition TD, you know you have to vote against the legislation. It is important, therefore, that we have another entity that looks at legislation. You do get a more considered assessment and appraisal of legislation by Seanad Éireann. And people say, oh, the Seanad is ineffectual. It hasn't blocked anything since the 1950s or the 1960s. That misunderstands the purpose and function of Seanad Éireann. Seanad Éireann is there to draft the laws of this country. And every law that you have on the statute book since 1937 has the imprint of Seanad Éireann upon it. So when people say, name me one thing that Seanad Éireann has ever done, I can list off to you the Equality Acts, the Criminal Proceeds Act, the Justice Act, the Social Welfare Acts. Its imprint is on each and every one of them. And for that reason, I think it's important to retain it. And as well as that, Seanad Éireann does something. It may not be that powerful, but at least it slows down government. And I would like government slowed down. I'm not fearful of Enda Kenny. But I'll tell you one thing, if Matt and his friends are in power, I'd like a government slowed down a bit. The second reason you should vote no on Friday is because of a word that is grossly abused and misused in our political discourse. It's the word democracy. Everyone on the panel is in favour of democracy. What does it in fact mean? Democracy means giving the individual in the country a right in the governance of his state. That happened in 2011 when Fianna Fáil were thrown out of power. That was democracy working. But look at the avenues that are open to the people of this country for democracy. You have it in general elections to the Dáil. You don't have it in respect of Europe, where we get regulations and directives handed to us from Europe. Nobody's suggesting that our voting of the MEP structure regulates that. It doesn't. And then you vote for councillors like me. I can't have any power when I'm a councillor in a local authority, but that's your other avenue of democracy. And you have democracy in a referendum. But where else do you have democracy? you potentially have democracy by playing a role in the election of Seanad Éireann. And it is an avenue towards democracy that should be protected and should be nourished. And let there be no doubt about it. When the Fine Gael poster says fewer politicians, what it means in reality is less democracy. It means less elected representatives. People may be cynical about politicians, but politicians are elected. Anyone can run for office. We are elected. You mightn't like it, but we are a personification of democracy. The third reason why you should vote against this referendum on Friday is because it constitutes an act of vandalism on our Constitution. Our Constitution has served this country well since 1937. It is an interconnected document. It has preserved us during the Second World War. It preserved us when Matt and his friends were going around shooting fellow Irishmen. It preserved us. It preserved us through the financial crisis. Now, let's be serious about this. It preserved this state. And now the proposal is that we're going to not only abolish the Seanad, but we're going to do it in such a way that we're going to change other fundamental rules. We're going to change it in such a way that the impeachment process for the President will be gone. It will be changed completely. Instead of having a system where one house prefers a charge and the other house investigates a charge, that's gone. Our system at present is based upon the American system. Now it will simply be dominated by the Dáil. Secondly, the removal of judges will be changed. The system was that judges had to be removed by a resolution of both houses of the Oireachtas. That'll be gone. Instead, you'll just have a resolution of the government-dominated Dáil, even though it has to be by 2/3. And finally, Article 27 will be gone. We talk about democracy again. The one provision whereby the bills put before the Houses of the Oireachtas can be referred by the President to the people for their vote if he believes it's of a point of national importance. That'll be gone. So this isn't simply about just getting rid of Seanad Éireann. There's much more to this. It's an act of constitutional vandalism, and for that reason I would ask you not to emasculate your constitution, but to vote no next Friday. Thank you.
Proposing the motion, Eoghan Murphy TD.
Thank you. I'd just like to say at the outset, as a graduate of the Stillorgan Polytechnic, aka UCD, I feel very privileged to be here. I'm not bitter. You know, you think from listening to the no side in this campaign that if you vote no to abolish the Seanad on Friday, that it will lead to some great political crisis in this country, some great erosion of our democracy, some great failure of the state and the political system. At the same time, they try and tell you that if you vote to retain the Seanad and somehow people manage to reform it, even though there's no consensus on how you would reform it, that it will suddenly cure all our political ills, that all of a sudden we'll have a great parliament full of great parliamentarians fit for the challenges of the 21st century. That's nonsense. It's a false choice and it doesn't stand up to any kind of intellectual scrutiny. Abolishing the Seanad will not erode our democracy because the Seanad isn't a part of our democracy. Its existence and every function is grossly undemocratic. There are many problems with our political system, but to think that reforming the Seanad is the answer to them is unfortunately misguided. It's like trying to fix the shed when it's the roof of the house that's leaking. The Dáil is what needs to be reformed.
Go ahead and do it.
Thank you for the interruption. We are standing in our own way a bit here, and that's natural. You know, because we have grown up with the Seanad, Senator, because it's always been there, we assume that it has to be there, or that we need it to be there. But when we look at best international practice, we see that there are very successful countries with one chamber parliaments, and they have healthy and robust democracies. Are we so special? Are we so different? I don't think so. Now, what powers would you give a new Seanad that would give it a meaningful role in our political system? Maybe you'd give it similar powers to the Dáil that we already have. Well, that would be redundant. We don't need a second Dáil. Perhaps you would give it greater powers, the power to amend or veto Dáil legislation. Well, then you're creating a chamber whose sole purpose and function is to undermine the democratic legitimacy of Dáil Éireann, of the chamber of people that you elected. Maybe you would give it weaker powers than the Dáil. Well, that would be to return to the status quo. Now, perhaps you could think of a way of electing people to this chamber. So you could have a group of experts in there representing your behalf, people coming from particular walks of life with particular expertise, geologists, economists, pediatricians, physicists. And that would be great when it came to their legislation. But what about those areas of life that they aren't experts in? What good is it having 2 paediatricians in the Seanad to debate maritime law? It makes no sense. Better to have those people come to reformed Oireachtas committees where they can scrutinise and debate legislation with TDs and work the system that way. It's a much more efficient and effective way of government, and it's practised by our European partners. There is no argument for a second chamber, no argument for a second Dáil. We don't need a House of Lords, some sort of elitist system for patronage for our political friends, or for keeping an elite, or for giving out more money to political parties. And we're not so large and diverse a country with a federal political system that we need a state or a Senate to balance a House of Representatives and lead to political deadlock. No, we need one Parliament, elected by the people to represent them in one chamber and to work on the national issues of the day. We have that in Kllr Éireann. Yes, it needs to be reformed. No one is denying that, least of all me. The government reform programme is currently underway, and while it doesn't go far enough, not yet, we have to recognise that the work of Parliament, the work of government is never finished. You don't have to stop at 5:30 and say we've done it, it's done. It's a process. It requires change, it requires self-reflection, it's a dynamic, and from time to time you test the system, you reform it, you move on and you look at it again. That's how it's meant to work, and that's what we're doing at the moment. And people will continue to push the reform agenda into areas like whip reform, reforming the Ceann Comhairle's office, giving that strength and independence to the Parliament so it can act as the check and balance on the government. That's how it should be. Our focus should be on reforming the Dáil to make it stronger and more independent. Our focus should not be on reforming the Seanad to answer the question of the need for Dáil reform. And I do have a genuine concern that if we embark on a lengthy and timely process of reforming the Seanad, it will cost taxpayers money and time, it will block the actual need for Dáil reform, and it still won't solve the problem that we have. The Seanad has no meaningful role now. It will have no meaningful role in a reformed Dáil. But on Friday, you have the option then to answer that question and to vote yes and to abolish it now and to make way for the new reforms that we want to see. And that's what this referendum is about. It's not about whether or not you want to abolish the Seanad or reform it. That's not the question being put to you. It's abolish or maintain the status quo, maintain political business as is. We need something far more radical than that, and that's what a yes vote will deliver. Now, tonight you will hear many arguments in favour of keeping the Seanad, and there'll be very good arguments. One argument will be that this is a power grab by the government. Well, that's nonsense, because the Seanad has no power. 1964 was the last time it delayed a bill, as Matt said, a pawnbroker's bill. That was the same year that Goldfinger was in the cinema. Rolling Stones released their first album. Fine Gael approved Declan Costello's Just Society document, and it delayed a bill. Now, with all the important pieces of legislation going through at the moment that are very long overdue because previous governments didn't deal with them, the last thing we need is more delays of bills. In fact, I think to keep the Seanad is a power grab, because it only serves the political parties that use it to put their friends in positions to get money from the system. That's the real power grab going on if we were to maintain the Seanad. You'll also hear the argument that democracies need 2 chambers. That's not true. Finland, Denmark, Norway, New Zealand, similar-sized countries, 1 chamber. They're all ranked in the top 10 OECD Democracy Index of best democracies. Some of the best democracies in the world only have 1 chamber. You might hear the argument as well that there's no price on democracy. It doesn't cost that much to have the Seanad. And that's true. But just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's good. I'd rather spend my money in a more efficient way, by giving extra resources to parliamentary committees, setting up an independent budgetary oversight office for parliamentarians like myself to properly challenge government financial bills and budgets of the day. And that day is coming, and it will come. You'll also hear arguments about the fact that the Seanad has given us great people in the past. It has, and it still does today. But they would have been great people anyway. The Seanad didn't make them great. They had that potential within them. We don't need some sort of social welfare political platform for them. If you want to make a contribution to political life, you can run for the council, for the Dáil, or for Europe. At the same time, you don't need to be a politician to get involved in politics. I think the days of poets waxing lyrical on the taxpayer's dime are over. And that's why we put this proposal to you today, or on Friday, when you get to vote yes. I think it's important that we recognise that our Parliament isn't perfect. I mean, that's why so many people got involved and ran in the last election, to bring about fundamental reform to the Dáil. But reform doesn't happen all in one go. It is a process. It requires time. It requires initiatives, and it requires a dedication to that process to see it through. And as each stage of reforms come through, you look at them again and you see, are they working? And you challenge them again. The work of government and the work of Parliament is never finished, but we are getting there in terms of some of the fundamental reforms that we need to see in this state. And it's important to recognise that. But reform does not mean creating a second Dáil that we do not need, so we shouldn't be wasting our time and our money talking about it. On Friday, you will be asked if you want to remove an outdated part of our parliamentary democracy in a move to build a better one, and I urge you to say it loud and clear by voting yes, to say to the government that you really want radical reform, something brand new, something we haven't seen in this country before, because you know what, we deserve it. And that's why I'd ask you to go out and vote yes, to break the status quo and remove the Seanad from our parliamentary landscape. We do not need a second Dáil. Thank you.
Opposing the motion, Lucinda Creighton TD.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd like to add my words of gratitude to Trinity, to the Provost, for the opportunity to come and address you and to participate in what is already a lively debate, and I'm sure we'll get a lot livelier. I'm not so familiar with this particular lecture hall, although I am a past student of this establishment. The reason I'm not so familiar with it is largely because I had company law lectures here on a Friday morning at 9 o'clock and I was generally otherwise engaged. But it's good to be back nonetheless. I suppose from my point of view there are two overarching reasons as to why I consider this proposal to be a flawed one, and why I am stridently advocating and hoping that others will exercise their right to vote no and to retain our Seanad and strengthen our democracy next Friday. My first issue is that of democratic centralism, which is all pervasive in this country and which is completely out of sync, not just with the rest of Europe, but essentially with the rest of the modern democratic world. And the second reason, I suppose, which has really prompted me to get involved in this is the spurious and very shallow and superficial arguments that have been proffered by those advocating a yes vote in recent weeks. The question of democracy has been, I think, already addressed from both sides of this debate. But it is an important one, it is a crucial one. And as Jim said, it is essentially how we as citizens exercise our vote and how we have our voice heard, how we ensure that we make good and robust legislation, how we ensure that we maintain freedom of speech, the opportunity to put forward alternative voices, often dissenting voices, and how we find space for that in our public sphere. And the Seanad plays a crucial role in that. We'll be told, and we've already been told, that the Seanad has no power, that it's irrelevant, that it's redundant, and so on. I fundamentally disagree with that. Yes, I advocate reform. Without a doubt. I think that we have to open up the Seanad, we have to make it a much more open electoral system and so on. But even in its current form, there is a merit in retaining the Seanad and ensuring that it continues to play its part in our democracy. As I said, we have an extraordinarily centralised political system in this country. We effectively have no meaningful local government, and Matt has actually already alluded to that. I'm also a former member of a local authority. I served on Dublin City Council, and it is true to say that successive governments have eroded the powers of local government and have taken away the voice of local people and their representatives on a community basis and on a county by county basis over an extended period of time. That's a really serious problem. It's a serious flaw. And how do we exercise authority in this country? Well, it's pretty much all done at the national level because local government is so powerless. But it's not as you might think. It's not power vested in the elected representatives of Dáil Éireann, by and large. It's power vested in a very, very strong and unusually and uncharacteristically centralised system of government. In most of the countries, and Eoghan has mentioned a number of countries, the Nordic countries, we've heard it repeatedly in recent weeks, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, etc., where they have unicameral systems. They are excellent models of democracy, there's no question about that, but they are genuine models of democracy where governments account to Parliament and where local government and regional government works. In this country, that is not the case. Our local government doesn't work, it effectively doesn't exist, and our national parliament has been denuded of its power over many, many years. There was a logic to that in the early days of this state, because there was a constant and real threat to the stability of the state and indeed to our democratic institutions. In fact, up until very recently, some political parties and their militarised wings didn't recognise the Dáil at all. And I'm talking in the last 20 years or so, they suddenly found their respect for our democratic institutions. So there was a logic and a method to the madness of maintaining and protecting the power wielded by the executive to the extent that it was in the early days. But there is no excuse for it now. And the problem is that instead of beginning the process of decentralisation of power, of spreading real and genuine democratic control amongst the population and across the country, instead we have further centralisation through the creation of the Economic Management Council, which is a council comprised of 4 ministries who effectively decide all of the government's economic strategy, which is then effectively rubber-stamped by the Cabinet, which of course is in reality the constitutionally recognised executive in this state. So there is a major problem with that. I personally have a big problem with it, and I'm not satisfied that as a response to that extraordinary level of centralisation that we respond by abolishing one of our houses of the Oireachtas, 1/3 of the Oireachtas, which is, as you know, is comprised by the Seanad, the Dáil and the President. The Seanad, as I said, does have real powers. It has the power to delay legislation by 90 days. It's a power that's not invoked frequently. But then how often does the Dáil reject legislation, which is also the power of the lower house? The reality is that it's a break. It's a constitutional break, which is there should we require it. And I think it's an important safeguard that I think, throw away at our peril. In terms of the day-to-day business of the Seanad has real power and it effects real change. It amends legislation on a weekly basis. Thousands upon thousands of amendments to bills have been passed by the Seanad. In the last 12 months alone, 500 amendments to legislation have been passed by the Seanad. And these are amendments that improve legislation where that legislation, for whatever reason, passed through the Dáil without those flaws in the legislation being identified. Probably because, as you might be aware, over 60% of the legislation initiated in the Dáil is in fact guillotined by the executive, which means that debate is cut off, the voices of elected deputies in the lower house are silenced, and the bill passes to the upper house. So there's a very important role for the Seanad in that respect. Important legislation is initiated in the Seanad by ministers, certainly. In the last year, I think Richard Bruton has initiated 4 bills in the Seanad, but also by senators themselves. For example, the Construction Contracts Bill, a really important bill which addresses payment to small business operators in this country. That's a piece of legislation that was initiated by Senator Fergal Quinn, and there's been plenty of reference to Senator Zappone's bill. And there have been many other examples of legislation initiated and often finding their way onto the statute books in due course. The Seanad has also, and I think we have to remember, it's not just about legislating. Legislating is hugely important, but so is having a voice in a democracy, so is putting difficult issues on the agenda and debating them. The Seanad has been at the forefront, it has been at the vanguard of debating issues that were too sensitive to be addressed in the Dáil because of the nature of the electoral system, because of the way in which our deputies are elected in multi-seat constituencies. So, for example, the decriminalisation of homosexuality was something that was put firmly on the agenda in the Seanad, not in the Dáil. The Dáil followed at a much later stage. Women's rights, workers' rights, low-paid workers, the rights of foreign workers, family planning. These are issues that were put centre stage in the Seanad long before they were ever dealt with or addressed in the Dáil. And I think that's an important factor to consider as well. Giving a voice and having difficult issues addressed in a way that is less confrontational and is removed, if you like, from the day-to-day sort of punch and judy politics that we see in Dáil Éireann, because the Seanad does give that space and allows those voices to be heard. There are a number of other crucially important powers for the Seanad. For example, under the Lisbon Treaty, a treaty that I campaigned on vigorously to see it passed, there were guarantees given to the Irish people in relation to our tax sovereignty, in relation to our right to opt out of mutual defence arrangements in Europe and so on. They are protected by both the Dáil and Seanad. And there is a requirement for a majority to pass any changes in respect of taxation policy, for example, both in the Dáil and Seanad. And that safeguard will be eroded and eliminated if we choose to obliterate the upper house. So there are many other issues I wish I could address now, but perhaps later as we go through the debate. I think the issues in respect of the spurious and misleading arguments that have been put forward by some of the proponents of the yes side have already been dealt with. The €20 million argument, which has been disproven by the Oireachtas Commission, which is the independent body, which says it's not true, is an extremely important argument which has gained currency and which is basically a falsehood. And I think we really need to consider that very seriously before we vote on the basis of saving money. But also the argument about less politicians. I really, really despair when I hear public representatives arguing, giving up, if you like, on the profession of politics, giving up on the value of public service and saying, you know, in a tokenistic, almost insulting way, let's vote for less politicians, as if politicians are not supposed to be the representatives of the people. I think we have to really examine our own consciences over that. Yes, politics has let people down. Yes, politics has failed in this country. But the solution is not to deride politics and public service. Rather, it should be to rebuild trust and confidence and faith in public service by our actions and not by rhetoric. Thank you very much.
Proposing the motion, Dr. Kevin Rafter.
Good evening. Looking at the two sides here this evening, I feel a little bit of a fraud and that I'm in the wrong place, surrounded by professional politicians and those who've sought our election to the Seanad or to the Dáil, which I suppose you'd wonder why I'm here. I'm here as a citizen. I work as an academic in Dublin City University. I was previously a political journalist. I worked with RTE and the Irish Times and another number of other media companies here in Dublin. And the reason I got involved in the Seanad campaign and the referendum campaign was formed out of the period over a decade that I spent in or around Leinster House. My assessment of the Seanad, seeing it in that period, was that it was a plaything of the political parties. It is an institution which the political parties use to warehouse failed politicians and to blood aspiring politicians. They have done that for over 7 decades. If you look at the last general election, or look at the current Seanad, 22 of the 60 members of the current Seanad were unsuccessful Dáil candidates in 2011. They indicated their preference where they wanted to be. They want to be in the Dáil because they know that's where the real power is politically in this country. It was also seeing the Punch and Judy show, and I disagree with Deputy Creighton on this. I would ask you to go onto the Oireachtas website and look at the order of business any week when the Seanad is sitting, and look at the order of business, and you'll see a Punch and Judy show. You won't see the type of quality debate and the great claims that have been made for the Seanad by previous speakers. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in 75 years. So that opinion of the Seanad, which I formed led me to discuss with a number of colleagues and to bring a group into formation for the duration of the campaign. And our role really has been to participate in events like this and engage in media discussion, to show the voters that there are other voices out there who believe that the yes vote is the correct vote in this referendum. And I'll tell you why I believe it's the correct vote, for three reasons. One, elitism. Second, irrelevancy. And third, I genuinely believe a yes vote is a vote for reform. The Seanad is elitist. I have two votes. 1988, I sat in this lecture hall. Dr. Barrett, Senator Barrett was one of my lecturers. I had a wonderful 6 years in this institution. I left with an MLit degree. I've never voted in a Seanad, this constituency. Every time the ballot has come in the post, I've returned it as a spoiled vote. I'm also a graduate, subsequently, of an NUI college, UCD, and I've done exactly the same on each period when those votes have come. I don't think it's right that 97% of the people are excluded from voting, and why an elite of 3%, and not all of that elite, cast their ballot, but why they're given a privileged position. So, one person, one vote in a republic. So, ending elitism, that's why I'm voting yes. But I'm also voting yes because I don't believe the Seanad is relevant. It's had 75 years to prove itself. 75 years where we hear great claims about all the things it could do, or all the things it might do. But all the things it has done, there's very little there. Like if you're doing the report card, you know, if you're writing it up as a school teacher on the report card on the Seanad, its first 75 years, you'd struggle to fill the report card. We've heard it drafts legislation. It doesn't draft legislation. It passes loads of amendments. It doesn't. They're government amendments. It's no different from the Dáil in that respect. It's a plaything of the political parties, and it has been irrelevant in terms of your life and my life, and it has been irrelevant for 75 years. There's no power grab here, because how can you grab power from an institution that has so little power, and even the tiny little power that it has, it doesn't want to use? It's been populated with really good people. Even the current Seanad, Senator Zappone, Senator John Crown, Senator Barrett, Fergal Quinn. I would have far more respect for them if they stood in a Dáil election, put their name on a ballot paper and allow the people, one person, one vote, to determine. I don't want a small elitist constituency or on the whim of one man, the Taoiseach, putting 11 people into the Seanad. That's not right. It's not fair. The third, I'm sorry, I should also add in terms of the other great example there is Shane Ross. Shane Ross had a very good career in the Seanad. But where did Shane Ross actually want to be? He proved it in the last general election. He wanted to be in the Dáil. And I would actually argue that Shane Ross has been far more effective in the last 2.5 years questioning ministers and the Taoiseach of the day than all the years he spent in Seanad Éireann when nobody even knew he was there. And his contribution was not anywhere near as important as it has been in the last 2.5 years. The Dáil is where it's at. The third point, so elitism, irrelevancy. The third point is reform. I genuinely believe that a yes vote is a vote for reform. And that's the reason why I decided to get involved with my colleagues with the civil society group in terms of arguing for a yes vote in this campaign. We've heard lots of discussion about reform. There's lots of proposals around reform. The one thing that we know in terms of reform is there is no consensus on reform. We have the Cllr Zappone Bill, we have the Crown Bill, we have the Green Party proposals, we have the Fianna Fáil proposals. What do you get if you vote no? You get the status quo. You'll get no reform, you'll get a continuation of what has been in place for the last 75 years. The reform of the Seanad is a false choice because there's no consensus on what reform is or what it might look like. A yes vote guarantees reform because our political institutions will be changed. And I think it will also force our politicians on both sides of the House to actually examine over the next 2.5 years how they're going to do their business in the next Parliament when the Seanad is gone. And it's one of the things I would like to see the current government do, is sit down with the opposition and the opposition parties and the technical group and draw up an imaginative, radical blueprint for how the next Dáil is going to work when the Seanad is gone. The question on the ballot paper asks, and the question on the ballot paper on Friday will ask us, do we want to abolish the Seanad? It doesn't ask us, do we want to reform the Seanad? Keeping the Seanad, in my view, will only ensure 75 more years without reform. That's the status quo. The political parties, they'll move into the next phase of the electoral cycle, European and local elections next year, a general election 2 years ago, in 2 years' time. They won't prioritise Seanad reform or looking at how the Seanad might have a role when it hasn't had a role for the last 75 years. So Friday is about reform, and a yes vote is the only genuine reform option on the ballot paper. And that's why I'm voting yes, and I would encourage you to do the same. Thank you.
Opposing the motion, Michael McDowell.
Mr. Provost, ladies and gentlemen, time is short, and I want to echo the sentiments of gratitude about being invited to address this occasion and move on. Kevin Rafter said he felt a bit of a fraud here, and perhaps what's in the back of his mind is that he wrote a book recently and published it about the Fine Gael party, and he likened Enda Kenny's proposal to abolish the Seanad and the circumstances in which it came into being as equivalent to politicians proposing drunk tanks at election time. And I'm a bit surprised, therefore, to hear that he's changed his mind so radically. I'm also perhaps a bit disappointed to hear that his cynicism about the political process led him to send back his Shan papers unmarked all those times, because I think that says a lot about a person that they would do that in those circumstances. I myself was an abolitionist, and what changed my mind was persuasion by Gareth Fitzgerald in particular, that he said, when you are a minister you will realise that Seanad Éireann is the place which will give legislation the best debate, the best examination, the best scrutiny, and raise the best objections to it. Dáil Éireann is an adversarial bear pit where their only interest is to score points off the minister, no matter what the merits of the issue. And I changed my mind as well because I saw the way the Seanad worked. It was an honour for me as a minister to introduce bills in that chamber, to see them properly debated, and then to bring them to the Dáil, where the adversarial TDs would be too embarrassed to contradict their own wiser and more polite colleagues in the upper house by making the kind of inane points that are frequently passed for a debate in Dáil Éireann, because it is a bear pit. I'm interested, by the way, this evening because the Irish Times published today an analysis of voter intentions and voter attitudes on this referendum. And it said that, in fact, it was cost which was motivating most people. You've heard two of these speakers for the proposition saying it's not about cost. And you've heard one of them skirt around the issue. But across this country, on every lamppost that is available, there's a poster saying, save 20 million, fewer politicians, abolish the Seanad. And that save 20 million slogan has obviously, if the Irish Times research is correct, proven to be effective. It's a lie. It's a complete lie and a fabrication. And what's worse, the Taoiseach and the leader of the party which is propagating that lie and hasn't withdrawn it is too cowardly to even address a debate of this kind before any audience where there aren't members of his own party present. And I just want to remind you that Fine Gael receives €4.8 million annually in taxpayer subsidies for its organisation. And we have posters around the country propagating that lie. But the truth is that there will be no savings at all under this amendment until 2016, and that then the total amount saved per annum will be 6.5 million. And that may sound a substantial lot looked at as a global figure, but it's €1.60 for every man, woman and child in this country per annum, and I'd ask you to remember that because I'll come back to that phrase. I do ask you to consider whether it's an irony that we're closing down a House of Parliament to allow the government to keep Farmley House open and empty at a cost of €2 million a year and to pay €3.4 million a year to their special political advisors who are unelected people. On Friday next, the people of Ireland are being asked to authorise the carrying out in 2016 of what I believe is the most destructive amputation procedure on their constitution ever attempted. And worse, it's not simply an amputation operation, it's being carried out blindfold, because very few of the people who will vote for the amendment will ever have seen or read the text of the amending bill, which runs to 57 pages. This is the bill to amend the Constitution. And there aren't just 3 sections in it or whatever. It's a massive open heart surgery on the Irish Constitution. And it's an operation that will leave the Irish Constitution deformed, not reformed. It will not address the fundamental issue, which is at the root of all our problems, which is that the executive in Ireland, the government, has the whole Parliament under its thumb. Now, I'm interested to stand here as a former member for Dublin South East in the company of 2 present members for Dublin South East. And I do ask you to consider the following, that one of them, Lucinda Creighton, was Minister for State for European Affairs and was doing a competent job. And although I don't agree with her views on abortion, she stood by those views on a matter of conscience. And for her trouble, she has been dismissed from her job, flung out of her parliamentary party, flung out of her rooms in Dáil Éireann, and has now been told that she will not be selected as a Fine Gael candidate in the next election. Her colleague, Deputy Murphy, put his head slightly above the parapet on one occasion and with a number of his friends established a Fine Gael internal think tank, and they were carpeted before the Taoiseach and told to draw their horns in and not to be doing that kind of thing that was divisive in government terms. And the contrast between the way Irish parliamentarians are dealt with by the system can be completely understood if you look, for instance, at what happened to rebel Westminster MPs who voted down David Cameron's proposal to bomb Syria. They didn't lose their party whip, they didn't lose their party membership, they won't be deselected, and Parliament stood up to the executive and a very wise decision was made as a consequence. Now, I said it's an amputation procedure being carried out on the blind, but can I just actually draw to your attention some of the consequences of this proposed amendment? It will, as has been said, take away from the President the right to refer bills to the people under Article 27 of the Constitution where they are of national importance. It will take away from the Taoiseach the right to appoint non-TD ministers such as Professor James Doug to the Cabinet. It will take away under Article 29, as Lucinda has mentioned, the double lock which we put in place at the Lisbon Treaty time, which said to the Irish people, OK, we can surrender your veto in Europe, but your guarantee that we won't do it will be that 2 houses of the Oireachtas will have to approve of that proposal. It will remove all parliamentary checks and balances of every kind whatsoever. A majority in Dáil Éireann under the amended Article 15 will be able to push through any legislation without debate at all, as though it was an emergency bill from now on. It will be the end of ever having in our Parliament people like Gordon Wilson, Seamus Mallon and Breege Rogers from Northern Ireland. It will throw into the dustbin of history the chamber in which Yeats spoke up for the civil rights of Protestants in the Free State in his famous "We Are No Petty People" speech, where Mary Robinson fought the lonely battle for the right to contraception and women's and children's equality, and where David Norris spoke out effectively against the persecution and spoke out for the emancipation of gay and lesbian citizens when they had no champions in the Dáil. It will involve, if we vote yes, the end forever of real involvement of civil society. Katherine Zappone's bill would give every single person in this country, whether they're a university graduate or not, one vote and one vote only. And we would have a real opportunity to put environmentalists, agriculturalists, economists, entrepreneurs, trade unionists into the Seanad to express their point of view as members of civil society. And most importantly, and going back to Lucinda Creighton's point, because I testified, having lost my seat before a subcommittee of the Dáil where she was generating a report, it will leave the present Dáil doing absolutely nothing on European Union legislative matters. They don't do anything on it, folks. Nothing is examined, nothing is scrutinised, and the role of the Oireachtas as a national parliament under the post-Lisbon consultative processes in European lawmaking are a total joke. Ladies and gentlemen, the arguments for the abolition of the Seanad have been put up on the notices and on the posters. They are false and demeaning. There will be no 20 million saved. There will be no fewer politicians. Even 60 extra local councillors are planned for the Dublin area in the reform to take place next June. And I just want to finish by saying this to you. When the Constitution was devised, checks and balances were put into the absolute power of a parliamentary majority in Dáil Éireann, and they were carefully constructed so as not to conflict with the right of the people to choose their policy, but to ensure that that right was not abused. Protecting the President, protecting the judiciary, protecting the people from legislation to which they are radically opposed, protecting the people from changes, abandoning our EU vetoes. These are important functions of Seanad Éireann. And I would finish by saying this, that ministers now say it is a useless chamber. None of them ever told the Seanad to its face when they were bringing in legislation there that it was useless. And I can tell you this, I've been a minister, I've guillotined legislation, I've done everything that ministers should and perhaps some things that they shouldn't do. But one thing I will always stand by, and that is this, that Seanad Éireann is a valuable part of our constitutional architecture. If we get rid of it, we hand all power to the party whips, the people who drove Lucinda Creighton out of office and out of her party, the people who frightened Eoghan Murphy to become much more better behaved in future, the people who flung Peter Matthews off the Finance Committee because of his stance on abortion. That's the reality of government domination of our Dáil, and if we vote to cement that in place and to put in place a constitution which has not one check or balance on that government power, we will be the losers in future governments. And as has been hinted here, some of those governments are very likely on current opinion poll data to contain people whose instincts won't be democratic at all. Thank you very much.
We have been expecting Alex White TD, but he hasn't arrived, and he may do before we finish. But if he does, we will let him speak, of course. But now we'll. After that applause, I don't know. Maybe he's trying to get in and he's been held back. We move now to Senator Katherine Zappone opposing the motion. Please.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you for the invitation. What a privilege it is to follow Michael McDowell. To stand before you opposed to the abolition of the Seanad, opposed to the undemocratic and inaccurate ways in which the government has put this to the Irish people, and opposed to government claims that their recent proposals for Dáil reform will provide the Irish people with one parliament that is better for constitutional democracy. I stand here to argue that instead what we need is a radical reform of the Seanad and the Dáil that will allow democratically elected representatives of geographic regions in the Dáil and of practical knowledge and experience in the Seanad to generate the best of legislation through direct dialogue with civic society and unimpeded by absolute cabinet dominance. This is the kind of constitutional democracy that the Irish people deserve, and this is the kind of democracy that will ensure a just society where all people have the potential to be free. As a nation that was brought to its knees as a result of false sums and inaccurate figures, I implore you to vote no to the deception that has been peddled relating to the savings of one of our houses of Parliament. I am profoundly troubled by what is happening on this campaign. Remember, we are voting here on the constitutional configuration of our democracy, that if it were to be changed at this fragile point in our recovery, the government's responsibility was to demonstrate the genuine benefits of change. And what have they done instead? They have spinned a message about savings that is simply not true, and I do not say that lightly. Look at the level of debate from the government on this absolutely grave and vital matter related to our democracy. Instead of parodies and parading giddily besides Beatle-like lookalikes in the towns of Ireland, that's what they did last weekend, our government would have been better to engage the people in serious debate, being true to the contributions of the finest voices in the houses of Seanad Éireann. Well, the Seanad, in its current form, does not have the strength envisaged for it by the Constitution, though this could be changed by the bill that Senator Fergal Quinn and I have already tabled and have been debated in the Seanad. There are countless examples of its effectiveness in generating, improving, and amending law throughout its history and in being a chamber of deliberative democracy, its members bringing forward progressive ideas. So it is simply not true to say that the Seanad has done nothing. Examples include Gordon Wilson's first speech to the Seanad in 1993. He had the ability to see both sides of the Northern conflict. His parliamentary presence contributed significantly to the replacement of Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution by the Irish people. In the late 60s, Senator Evelyn Owens brought her experience as a trade unionist to her Seanad speeches on workers' rights and consistently highlighted the plight of women in the workforce, forming the historical backdrop to Ireland's anti-discrimination legislation. Or in the present Senate, independent senators' motions on the future of prostitution legislation was a catalyst for a huge public consultation process and a report issued by the Oireachtas Justice Committee with radical recommendations for the future of our legislation, laid before both houses of the Oireachtas. In the current term, many pieces of legislation have been passed by the Dáil with significant defects that had to be corrected with the Seanad, with over 530 amendments to bills. What kind of bills? Bills such as the National Vetting Bill, Children and Vulnerable Adults, the Credit Union Bill, the Constitutional Amendment on Judges' Pay. The Personal Insolvency Bill, within which I had an active role, was hugely improved by the Seanad, with 245 amendments made in the arena of pensions, excluded debt, and also reasonable living expenses. And in addition to these, the government has accepted recommendations by senators that also correct money bills passed by the Dáil. For example, in the finance local property tax. In my own exchanges with the Minister for Finance on 3 finance bills, I pointed out that there were a number of areas of tax laws that did not achieve equal treatment between married people and civil partners. And as a result of those interventions, a total of 16 amendments were made to these bills, and the Minister thanked me for my interventions. The government tells the people that its proposals for Dáil reform will be sufficient for one parliament to provide effective checks and balances on its power. But I haven't read any commentator that has agreed with this. As noted by Ireland's eminent political scientists, and 4 of them wrote an article in the Irish Times, and they said virtually nothing in the proposals incentivizes the Dáil to be more aggressive in its scrutiny of government. But most importantly, none of the government's proposals for Dáil reform will be put into the Constitution. So the government can make these changes and then they can reverse these changes according to their desires. This contrasts starkly with Sweden, for example, one of the countries that the government uses to boost its arguments to abolish the Seanad. Sweden made changes to its constitution to ensure a scrutiny of cabinet power when they moved to one chamber. For example, a committee is constitutionally required to examine ministers' performance and handling of government business in Sweden. And while ministers sit in Parliament, they don't have a vote. Contrast government proposals for Dáil reform that aren't being put into our Constitution with our concrete proposals for Seanad reform put forward by Senator Quinn and myself, 75 pages of them. And what I want to tell you is that we debated this in the Seanad. It was passed to second stage. The government accepted it to move to the next stage after second stage. So it could become law by Christmas. So there's no reason why a modern Ireland shouldn't have 2 chambers. Modern doesn't equal 1. Modern means that we have institutions of governance that are representative of the best interests of all the people, both the majorities and the minorities. Modern means that we have parliamentary forms of deliberations whereby it is the lawmaker themselves who bring diverse and minority backgrounds to the tables of lawmaking. Yes, we need to engage with civic society, but we need to have some of them at the tables of lawmaking too. Modern means that excluded voices are let in, that we have pluralism, independence at the tables where law is generated, amended, improved. This is the prime way of holding our cabinet to account. So our bill will democratize the Seanad. It will be representative of the people for the next Seanad elections in 2016. It will give one person, one vote. It will give a vote to those who have been forced to immigrate and Northern Ireland residents. There could be equal numbers of women and men. And candidates for the Seanad would not represent geography, but expertise and practical knowledge in farming or human rights or equality or business or culture or engineering or literature. And political parties would no longer control nominations and elections, so new voices and minorities could be at the heart of our lawmaking system. To conclude, we are uniquely placed within Europe to imagine a radical new form of governance that includes a second house rather than excludes it. We have the opportunity to choose a diversity and a breadth of voices rather than impose oneness and sameness. That's what freedom means today. And so I stand opposed to Seanad abolition and invite all Irish citizens to vote no.
Now, I've got some questions from the floor written. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it out, put it to the proponents, and then ask someone from the opponents to reply, so as we'll get some from both sides. Here's the question from Gavin Rothwell, a student. Many of the other countries who abolished their upper house already had strengthened their local democracy, i.e. given more power to district and local councils. Why should I vote to abolish if Ireland has not strengthened its own local government? Would someone like to have a go at that?
Is that working? Yeah? Well, thanks for the question, Gavin. It's a good one. I mean, we have to reform local government in this country. Bringing in the property tax, although unpopular, is a part of that, and we have to go further. Legislation is coming to the Dáil to do that. We also have to reform the Dáil. That's very important, and we have to recognise that as an ongoing process. But the answer to those 2 problems in our political system is not to reform the Seanad. If there's something wrong with the Dáil, if there's something wrong with local government, reform those things. And that's what we're trying to do. Reforming the Seanad is completely unnecessary, and if you're worried about getting rid of a check and balance at the moment when those reforms haven't happened, the Seanad isn't a check and a balance. So don't be worried about that. It's not part of our democracy in any meaningful way in terms of actually bringing through independent amendments or independent pieces of legislation separate from what the government has approved.
I suppose I should deal with that issue since I'm the only councillor on this side of the House. As a councillor, I have very limited powers. That hasn't changed in recent years. My own party can be criticised for that, but there's been no reform in respect of local democracy. We don't have real powers. It's also instructive to note that the government, as Michael mentioned, is proposing that there will be 53 more councillors in Dublin City and Dublin County after the next local elections. We have to spend money on changing the chamber in Dublin City Council to reconstruct it to facilitate the extra councillors coming in. So that's just an important context when you're dealing with the cost issues. But there's been no reform of local democracy, and I don't see any proposals coming.
Well, I suppose, first of all, I was always very thankful to be here. I didn't realise how lucky I was to be here, seeing as me and my friends, according to Jim, were out shooting people. I didn't know how Minister McDowell in his time as Justice Minister didn't have me rounded up. I'd like to see your evidence for that point, first of all.
Well, no, in fairness to you, Matt, it shouldn't have been a reference to you. It was a reference to the provisional IRA, which tried to undermine the state.
A petty attempt to try and win the argument last week, but that's the in relation to local government, I come from a county that's actually losing 45 councillors as a result of the so-called government reform.
Would you mind addressing us? We can't hear you talking across there. You're not using the microphone.
Well, the mic is there, so I don't know if you can hear it or not. Is that better? Jim wants to go back to section 31 as well as all the other bits.
Try that one.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't want me to repeat everything I've said so far? Just in relation to local government, it is true to say that this government are failing in the exact same way as other governments. I'm listening on the road up this evening to a very soothing voice telling me about the virtues of Irish water, and that's basically the latest in a long line of services that up until now have been provided and delivered and accounted for at a local level and has now been removed. But I will agree with them on this point. The fact that a Seanad is there does nothing to improve those services at a local level. It does nothing to, in fact, when talking about Irish water and all the other services, the Seanad actually rubber stamped, like it has done every single other occasion. It rubber stamped Dáil's decision to remove those powers from local government. Yes, political reform means a strengthened Dáil. It also means a strengthened local government. It is, though, a separate debate than that we're going to have on Friday.
Now, let's have a final word, Lucinda.
Yes, well, I'm a former member of Dublin City Council, as I said. The only real function for councillors is to develop, to amend and to vote on the city or county development plan. It's an important power, but it's really the only meaningful power of councillors. For the rest of the 5 years, you really are, I suppose, beholden to the officials, the paid unelected officials, particularly the city or county manager, who, again, and this goes back to the point about the centralisation of power in this country, who is appointed by the government of the day. So all roads tend to lead back to government buildings. We promised, and I'm a member of the Fine Gael party, although I have been expelled from the parliamentary party, we promised a democratic revolution, in the words of the Taoiseach, before the last election. We haven't delivered upon it. And I'm absolutely certain at this point that if we vote to abolish the Seanad this week, that will be the box ticked. That will be the democratic revolution, and the rest of it, from local government reform to Dáil reform to systemic reform of our political system, will be put off until another day. And I say that with deep regret, but that is the reality. So if we want to see reform, it can't simply be one blunt instrument abolishing the Seanad, ignoring the fundamental flaws that exist right throughout the system, from grassroots right up to government level. It needs to be a comprehensive, wide-ranging reform, and I think that we would be fools to do away with one house of the Oireachtas without demanding all of the aforementioned. Thank you.
I'll write one more written question before I open it to the floor from Nicholas Armstrong. The upper house of Irish politics provides a vital independent system of checks and balances to Irish government. Please explain how its impending abolition would not be an attempt to dilute our democracy. Maybe that someone, Kevin?
Just briefly, as I mentioned when I spoke, how can you grab power from an institution that has very little power? And that's the first point. And I'm part of a group where we're spending €1,000 on this campaign. We came together, we all put €100 on the table and said, we will get involved. We don't have the resources to put posters up. But the poster with the jackboot and the Constitution that we see around town from Michael's group across the way, how can you take power from an institution that doesn't have any power? And even the small little power that it has in terms of delaying legislation, it has never used. So I don't think there's anything to fear in terms of the so-called power grab. I think that it's a side show, and I think it's a distraction of an argument. I think by voting yes is an endorsement for reform, and I think the political system, all of the parties on both sides, and the different groups in the Oireachtas will come together next week, and they'll have 2 years to deal with the consequences of removing the Seanad. And I think that will spur them all on in terms of more fundamental reform. So there isn't one big bang reform package, but I think by voting yes and abolishing the Seanad, we're certainly going to give impetus to the reform agenda, and the politicians are going to have to deal with that. And I don't think any of us will wake up next Monday and Irish politics and Irish democracy will be any changed because of the abolition of the Seanad if people vote yes.
Well, is this working? It is.
Yeah.
Can I just make a point there about what Kevin has said? His own group, One House, one of its leading lights is Eoghan O'Malley, a colleague of his in DCU. And he has said about the government's raft of proposals for Dáil reform that they are completely inadequate and very disappointing. And if that's what we're being offered now, you can imagine how much less we will get. Remember that this government in 2011, when they were elected, said that they were going to use the guillotine on the rarest of occasions. And they've used it, as Lucinda said, in 60% of the legislation that has passed through Dáil Éireann. The other point that Kevin is making, and I just don't believe it stands up to scrutiny at all, is that the government, having abolished the Seanad, will then turn to Fianna Fáil, Sinn Fein and the technical group and say, how do we make ourselves more accountable to you? How do we set up committees which will grill us and embarrass us in public? How do we bring about a situation where if a backbencher misbehaves, he won't be sacked off a committee? How do we abandon all our powers and make you much more powerful? That scenario just simply isn't credible. And going back to the earlier remarks that were made, the proposition was put forward, abolish the Seanad, and then somebody can bring forward proposals for a really democratic Seanad. But this misunderstands one fundamental feature of our Constitution, that the only way in which constitutional change can come is on a bill initiated in Dáil Éireann. And therefore to ask Dáil Éireann, once it has all power, to suddenly create a new chamber which will challenge it and which will delay it and which will impede it and which will disagree with it on decisions to remove the President and the judiciary and which may disagree with it on surrendering our tax vetoes in Europe, that is for the birds.
But Michael, you're actually undermining the no-sides argument, because the basis of the no-side argument is that that same government that you're saying won't reintroduce any legislation are on Saturday morning, if there is a no vote, going to wake up and decide that they're going to accept one of the half a dozen or so reform packages that are on the table. It won't happen either. It is the current Seanad that we have, or no Seanad at all. That's the choice that we're being given on Friday.
Sorry, can I come in on a point there? Sorry.
Okay, we'll open it to the floor for questions. And I'm going to ask some of the students, and I'll let you in, Dr. Barrett, no doubt, but Here's a question here. No, but I think I want to get some of the students. You appreciate that. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Aaron Valley, and I'm not a member of the political party. Can I just say, first of all, thanks to Trinity College for giving me the opportunity to participate, and secondly, can I say, Mr. McDowell, that was a fine piece of work. I suppose I'll direct my question to Mr. Murphy. Can I just say again, firstly, how dare Fine Gael put up those posters with 20 million? That's an inaccurate figure. The Oireachtas Accountancy Commission, commission determined it was 9.3, and if you remove the taxes, it's 6.5. That's €1.60 for everyone here. That's not a lot of money. And second of all, I was in Drum yesterday, and a man handed me a leaflet which I looked through, and it said, you know, oh, Denmark has one house, and Sweden and Finland, and I thought, oh, this is again misinformation, because there's also freedom of conscience. We don't have that here. You can ask Lucinda and Church. And my question basically, Mr. Murphy, is this. Why on earth should anybody in this room take you seriously when you put up the absolute misinformation and inaccuracies for the mainstream of our campaign in terms of posters and leaflets? Why should anyone take you seriously here? Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Aaron, for your question. I mean, the 20 million figure was a figure supplied to us by the Oireachtas Commission in detail as the cost of running the Seanad every year. That figure stands as a fact. Now, you might not like that argument as an argument to make. It's just one you could make, and that's fair enough. You don't have to like that particular argument. I mean, we can talk about the costs of democracy all day. If you earn €40,000 a year, pay €10,000 in taxes, €13 of that goes on running the Oireachtas. If we get rid of the Seanad, $12.99. You know, I mean, we can have that debate if we want to, and you may not want to, you may, but I think it's a bit of a red herring if you're saying, you know, don't vote for this radical reform of our parliamentary system because the 20 million figure on the poster I don't agree with. And if you want to talk about negative messaging or the wrong message, I mean, again, as Kevin pointed out, these posters with the boot on the Constitution are ridiculous. People standing up and saying, oh, if we get rid of the Seanad, the corporation tax rate will be under threat. It's spurious. I mean, that's just not the case. Exactly. At the moment, I mean, the Seanad does not have an effective role in acting as any sort of check and balance. And, you know, that is a problem in our parliament is getting the checks and balances. Where do you focus your attention? You focus it on reforming the Dáil. And what is certain is that if you vote yes on Friday, you will abolish the Seanad, and that will be the catalyst for the reforms that we need to see that are already underway. But if you vote no, I mean, where's the promise of reform? I think it's an irresponsible argument to make. Vote no and we'll reform everything.
Catherine.
Yes, this is an example. Is that on?
Yeah.
I mean, with all due respect, that is an example of the government continuing to argue the inaccuracy of what is on the poster. The poster says save 20 million. And what they have is evidence of costs, 20 million, both direct and indirect, not save 20 million. The Houses of the Oireachtas Commission also says it is not possible to estimate the net savings of abolishing the Seanad. That is actually the fact. That is the evidence. And furthermore, in relation to the issues around, I suppose, reform, and this is where, you know, the other side often suggesting that there's so many proposals for reform. We have a bill, as I said, that's already been in the Seanad, that has already been voted on. That's how law is made, by lots of ideas that are eventually distill into a bill and goes through the Houses of the Oireachtas, and everybody with their different ideas comes with their different views, and ultimately law is made. So there's no difference in what we're suggesting in terms of what is already there. And unfortunately, one of the things I suppose finally I want to say is that I'm disappointed also to see is that in terms of the reforms that the government has put forward in terms of Dáil reforms, that they didn't listen to Eoghan Murphy's very excellent proposals in a big report that he wrote, particularly in ways in which we could remove some of the whipping of the parliamentarians, not necessarily on all cases, but on some cases. So those proposals are there even from their own people, and they're not listening to them.
Kevin.
Just briefly.
We'll keep the clapping until the end of rounds. They're all brilliant, you know, so they all deserve applause all the time. But Kevin.
Just briefly on the cost argument, I think, unfortunately, what we get when we've heard the cost argument over the last couple of weeks is a variation of the Punch and Judy show between the two sides and the politicians on both sides. I wrote in an article right at the outset of the campaign for the Sunday Times that even if the Seanad cost zero, I would still support its abolition. I think there's a more fundamental argument beyond the cost issue, irrespective of what the cost is. And 6.5 million is still a lot of money, but irrespective of what the cost is, whether it's zero, whether it's 6.5, whether it's 20 million, this is an elitist institution. It's an irrelevant institution. And in relation to the Zappone-Quinn bill, the Reform Bill has no choice but to keep in place those elitist elements. The Taoiseach's nominees, the university seats, the vocational panels, they're all written into the Constitution. So no bill passed by Christmas can remove that elitism and get us to a situation whereby it's one citizen, one vote. And that's why I fundamentally disagree with the Quinn-Zappone bill. I think it has all the hallmarks of the current system, all the flaws of the current system, they're still in there. And I think that is the reason why I would encourage people to go out and vote no. It's about ending elitism.
Provost, just briefly, I don't know, Kevin, whether you've actually read the Zappone bill.
I have.
Because if you have, you couldn't say that it doesn't provide for one person, one vote. It makes it very clear that everybody, university graduates or anybody else, is entitled to one vote on one of the panels, and that's all they're entitled to.
Panels, Michael.
Sorry, yes.
11 Taoiseach's nominees, unelected representatives
yes.
put into this House. That's not democracy. That's not how democracy matters.
Sorry, hold on a second. The 11 people have included people like Gordon Wilson, Katherine Zappone to my right, people like that. It is not
Fianna Fáil General Secretary.
It is not elitist. It is a mechanism whereby the Taoiseach of the day can bring in people into the Seanad whose voices should be heard, including including ministers such as Professor James Doug, who was appointed Minister for Foreign Affairs, having been head of the Irish European movement.
Michael, party hacks.
That's the mechanism.
One person, one vote.
Right. Another question. I'm going to take. Where's the roving mics? I think that. Who has the roving mic? Bring it to that lady then, and then there's another one up at the very back, and that's next in the. So please bring her the mic as well. Can you bring that up there to the very back? All right, please. What's your question?
Is the lack of a vote for reform as an option on the ballot paper a further example of disenfranchisement? If the government was serious about democracy and not bent on further centralisation, would they not have offered this as an option and put local democratic reform in place before Seanad abolition?
You're going to put it to someone
can
here,
I just deal with that? In the local elections next May, the people of Dublin are going to be asked a question by the government as to whether or not they want a directly elected mayor. That's not an amendment of the Constitution. It's the government recognising that there are certain questions upon which people should be asked before political decisions are being made about it. Similarly, the government could have, separately to amendments of the Constitution, put forward an option for reform by way of just putting the question to the people to see whether or not they wish to have reform. And they failed to do that. But if this is defeated on Friday, I think the reality is the government is not going to realise that the Seanad can stay as it is. The Seanad must be reformed if there's a no vote on Friday. And I think the government will recognise that and act accordingly.
Owen.
Well, thank you for the question. Again, if you put in a ballot paper the option, you could have said yes, no, or reform, as a simple question as Jim puts it, and people tick the reform box, and let's just say that happened. The government now has a responsibility to introduce reforms of the Seanad that will require another constitutional referendum, a second referendum. It would then have to get agreement on those reforms, agreement we haven't been able to achieve in 75 years, but let's just say we could. A series of amendments to the Constitution, Michael gives out about how we might be damaging the Constitution by abolishing the Seanad. Trying to write in a wholly new reformed Seanad that wouldn't interfere in some way with the democratic rights that's already in there for the Dáil Éireann would be next to impossible. And if the government then failed in that referendum, we'd have this strange situation where people had voted for reform, not agreed to reform proposals. So the government would be acting outside of the Constitution. So I think it's a very impractical way to proceed with things. I mean, it's a simple question, yes or no. And Jim talks about, in relation to the comments that Jim made about asking the questions as well, it comes back to the question of, do we need a second chamber? in our country? Do we need a second chamber? If we can give all of the strengths and powers that Michael talks about and Lucinda talks about to an overhauled parliamentary committee system, why do you need a second chamber? I mean, what's wrong with the people who are elected by the people? I mean, do we think that the people are stupid? Do we have some sort of, do we look down on the Dáil? Is it not good enough for you? Do we then have to elect some sort of chamber of experts who are better than those elected by the people? I mean, I think it says something very negative about the electorate when we talk about the Parliament in that way.
Lucinda is next, and then we're back to Matt.
Well, I mean, I think the problem is that we don't think outside the box in this country, and we have this tendency to just continue on doing things in the same failed way that they have always been done. The idea that you can't give an option in a referendum, quite frankly, is an insult to all of our intelligence. I mean, there is absolutely no reason, no logical explanation as to why an option of reform could not have been put on the ballot paper on Friday. And I have to say, it's equally insulting to suggest that a consensus cannot be arrived at on how to reform. I mean, if that's the case, then the Dáil will never be reformed. In actual fact, back in 2001, an all-party committee was established which published comprehensive proposals on Dáil reform, agreed and stood over by the whips of all of the political parties and none. It was published, it was agreed, and then the government, yet again, refused to implement it. So I think we have to stand up and be counted here. And if the dominant political parties in this state refuse to implement reform, then we as the citizens of this state have to demand it. It's as simple as that. And I think we've been far too placid about this for far too long. The idea that the Seanad will somehow interfere with government, that's not what's proposed, and in fact it's not what the Seanad was ever designed to do, and it's not what it does currently. But what it has the capacity to do, even in its current incarnation, is to improve, to make recommendations, as I said, to debate, to put issues on the agenda, to amend legislation, and a fully democratically elected Seanad with universal franchise where every man and woman in the state over the age of 18 and over can vote, has every capacity to do that and to enhance decision making. If you go to the doctor and they give you a serious diagnosis, you probably go for a second opinion. There's nothing to be feared by a second opinion, and that's simply the capacity of the Seanad to give a second opinion. It's not saying that we don't trust the people elected by the people. For God's sake, I'm one of them. But it is simply to say that in our bizarre electoral system, one which I also believe needs to be reformed, that's a debate for another day, where we have these multi-seat constituencies, where you have the infighting between political parties and within political parties, the option of having a second chamber where people don't have to be full-time politicians, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't expect Katherine Zappone or Sean Barrett or Fergal Quinn or John Crown to give up their day job to participate in the Seanad. I don't care if senators aren't paid at all, quite frankly. Now, maybe the senators have something to say about that. If they were to be paid for cover their expenses or whatever, I actually think that there would be many people who would be willing to serve in the Seanad in a part-time capacity, to give advice, to enhance our debate, to put issues on the agenda, to scrutinise and improve legislation. That's the role of the Seanad, and I cannot see why we should fear it.
Lady at the back there now, in the scarf. Yes, please, go ahead.
You'll have to excuse me for coming back to the topic of cost, but on the Fine Gael posters it says, say, 20 million. We know now that figure has been made to say that isn't true. Fine Gael has made no attempt to let people know that that figure is not true, to take down the posters. And also, there was talk that there would be introduction of more councillors if the abolition went through and there was reform in the Dáil. That wasn't accounted, was that accounted for in that, say, 20 million figure? Because as far as I can see it, Fine Gael are playing on the heartstrings of the public, who are just completely thinking this country is sinking, we have no money, and Fine Gael just seem to have completely focused on what the normal person is thinking in terms of this government needs to save money.
Okay, well, does anyone want to take any of these
Just
briefly,
to say, very briefly on that point, I mean, what we got from the Oireachtas Commission was the cost of the Seanad was 20 million. Now, the Commission said it couldn't calculate the net savings, but it also said that those net savings would fall to the government of the day to deliver them. And what Fine Gael is saying is that if we're in government, we will.
Can I just excuse myself? I have to go to another debate that starts at 7:30. It's on the Seanad also, you'd be glad to hear. So thank you very much.
Can I come in there?
Well, I mean, I don't want to beat this cost thing to death, but the truth of it is, if you look at today's Irish Times, it's a lie that has stuck. People believe it. And if people have been told this, I think it does lie on those who put it up as a saving that would be made to formally retract it. And it was very, very interesting here this evening that none of the speakers for the proposition, because they're before a relatively sophisticated audience and they know they're going to be contradicted, none of them came out with the 20 million saving and none of them mentioned it until they were cornered by questions or speeches from this side. And, you know, if we really do believe in the quality of democracy, and if the Irish Times poll is true, that most people want to get rid of the Seanad because of the cost argument, there is something really rotten about our system of politics that those who have advocated saving 20 million haven't even the courage now to go on television and explain why they said it and defend that untruth.
As I stated at the outset, I have not, and I've been at quite a number of these debates, and I have never brought this down to an issue of cost, because, as I say, I believe that there are fundamentally sounder arguments for the abolition of the Seanad. But it was interesting in the Irish Times, because if you flip it around, the argument for most people who are intending to vote no is that they believe that there will be reform of the Seanad. And that is the lie, if you like, of the no campaign, because it very clearly states on any poster I've seen, vote no for reform. And there will be no reform. And I thought it was very interesting that Lucinda mentioned the 2001 report, because she's right, the parties who were in the Dáil at that stage and on that particular committee did reach a consensus. So what government was supposed to implement it? It was the 2002 to 2007 government. That was Fianna Fáil at the helm. During the course of that government, one Michael McDowell became the Taoiseach, basically the Deputy Prime Minister. They're the two parties who are now promising you reform. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the Seanad as it is. If you believe that you are going to get some form of magic wand that's going to deliver reform, when the people who are promising that reform had the opportunity to do it and didn't, well then you too are buying into a lie.
Okay, now next question, and I'm going to have someone from this side. And can you have the microphone maybe to that lady? Well, now, Senator Barrett is next, so please put your question. No, you just wait until afterward. So Barrett first.
The Trinity bill divided by 60 senators is 333,000. I donated to the Provost by courtesy of Fine Gael. That's the cost of the senator, confirmed by Fine Gael, and it will be donated to the Access Fund. It doesn't exist. The bogus number. Fine Gael should not put it here. What does the Senate do? Quote from the leader of Fine Gael in the Senate: blocking legislation is not what the Senate is about. Improving and enhancing legislation is a key contribution we make to the legislative process. We've done that 600 times. Legislation comes in because the wisdom has no monopoly in the government, has no monopoly in the senior civil service. In fact, the Wright report shows in the Department of Finance there are 93% unqualified to deal with matters. So we bring that there. We call banking legislation is more radical than the government. Ours went to Brussels because the government said no legislation to Brussels, and banks cost to 64 billion and can't. What is it? So the advice from ours comes is, should the Irish people, the Fine Gael leader in the House, the Irish people of free democracy will be convinced in any way by the ambassador of this House, they must vote no in the referendum. That's the Fine Gael leader in the Senate, not the people they send in here. What about the Labour Party? Minister Katherine Zappone I thank everybody who has contributed. As I stated previously, I'm always fascinated by the rate of debate in the Shannon. It is a far better place than its critics give it credit for. I disagree with John F. Kennedy when he quoted from Lord Edmund Burke, Leinster House does not inspire by its ideas. It does inspire by its ideas. That's why I liaise with Provost and his predecessor to bring the wisdom of science, engineering, medicine, economics. You know, in engineering we had a minister who didn't believe in sat-navs, so Professor Rice, and we put that minister to life. He'd be advised by unqualified civil servants that sat-navs were dangerous. We found out that his own Coast Guard was using sat-navs. I didn't have to take a 3-hour written examination to see when the Coast Guard was. We need the expertise of 64 academic departments in that house. And that's what the university seeks to reform. Now, in addition to what's been said here, now this thing, we lose two things if you vote no. Our Northern Ireland voters will be deprived of a vote. We have members of the Dublin University constituency and Enniskillen, Belfast, and every one of the northern counties that have been cut off by this partitionist government. And you know the insult that was added, the North-South Inter-Parliamentary Association was invited to the Chamber next Friday. The Chamber has to be abolished, the Chamber which Northerners are allowed to vote, and the government didn't realise how ham-fisted it was, not having to withdraw the invitation. The other one is all the exiles, the diaspora, lose the votes. You would have seen the Cork study last week, 63% of Irish immigrants now have degrees. They are allowed to vote in our constituency. They will lose that because the Constitutional Convention recommends they should have a vote in their but no arrangements have been made. So the Provost and the other returning officers give 63% of Irish immigrants a vote. Edmund Kennedy gives none of them a vote. And I think that is very wrong. We're trying to build up Irish links overseas. When I just talked to Matt, I work with Matt's colleagues on a daily basis in the Senate. They are very impressive members of the Senate. We did a lot of work on the personal insolvency legislation. You stay there at 10 or 11 at night, putting down 500 amendments, I think I have 220 or something like that. And that's the way business is done. You don't call upon the minister to resign or buying a gas or a punch and Judy show. We sit down and go through legislation line by line. The Sinn Fein standards and so are the others. And I think, don't judge, particularly, Kevin, the Senate that you saw. In fact, the emptiest part of the Senate these days are the press boxes. It is a live debating chamber which is making a serious contribution, and that's why I agree with the Provost predecessor did. Bring the knowledge up 3 minutes to Leinster House from this university, because the country was destroyed by people who said, doesn't matter about banks, we'll save them regardless of the costs. That's the last time we took a number on trust from senior civil servants, and you'll pay for that for decades ahead. Young people are showing the ability to be in favour of retention. Do go in there, replace Norris and myself with better people who regularly debate Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, Gael, and Will. You're needed up there. Don't abolish yourself. And grumpy old people at home, tell them to vote no as well.
By way of focus there, maybe the Northern Ireland and diaspora voters, I'll ask the opponents and then on the other side. So
I'll just make 2 points, and Senator Barrett, or Dr. Barrett as I knew him, was certainly one of my favourite lecturers, but I fundamentally disagree with you. 5 years ago on the bank guarantee, where was the Seanad? Where was the great watchdog then? Can I just in relation to Northern Ireland, in terms of the Belfast Agreement in 1998, and Michael McDowell will be fully aware of this, we now have a committee within the Oireachtas where elected parliamentarians from Northern Ireland discuss matters of mutual interest with elected politicians within the Oireachtas, not Taoiseach's nominees. And so in a sense the structures within Parliament have changed fundamentally post the Belfast Agreement, and the voices in Northern Ireland are given a deeper, a more meaningful role and a more institutionalised role than they were previously.
Just, Provost, it is not true to say that senators don't form part of the Northern Ireland interaction between parliamentarians. That's just simply not correct. They do. And secondly, I mean, quite apart from university graduates that Sean has spoken about, there will be absolutely no means whatsoever to give a vote to expatriate emigrants if we get rid of the Seanad. It's the only entry, it's the only porthole through which foreign votes of Irish nationals can be brought into the parliamentary process. Once Dáil Éireann is the only chamber, there's one simple way to vote in Dáil Éireann, and that is the manner laid out in the Constitution. And you have to be in a constituency and be one of the voters. And it's the end, it's goodbye to all of that. It's goodbye to Gordon Wilson, it's goodbye to all of these people, Seamus Mallon. And one other thing, you know, it's been said here that, the Seanad is useless. Pearse Doherty was an unsuccessful candidate in the general election, I think in 2007, and was elected to the Seanad. Let's remember that. And he's now a useful member of Dáil Éireann. I'll give him that credit here. And I don't remember him during those years saying this is a useless institution and must be brought down. And I would ask each and every one of you tonight, when you go home and have recovered from listening to me and the others, to do one thing. Google the contribution of Gerry Adams, it's on YouTube, to the debate on the abolition bill in Dáil Éireann. Every single word he said accords with what I have said here this evening, and every single word he said disagrees with what Matt has put in place. And what happened in the meantime was that the Ardcórla of Sinn Féin met and effectively changed the party's policy 180 degrees. He was supporting retention, he was speaking passionately for it and reform, and suddenly he became his party became the abolitionist. He went to ground, and Pearse Doherty, to save Gerry Adams' embarrassment, was given the job of bringing the ball over the line.
First of all, can I thank Senator Barrett for his kind words in relation to the Sinn Féin senators. I've been speaking to them. They think you're sound as well, I have to say. I'll certainly don't know how I'm going to break the news to Gerry Adams that Michael McDowell is a fan of his speeches, but I think I'll broach that one over the phone. Let's be frank about this. I'm not going to go into a big debate in terms of Sinn Féin's position. I happen to agree entirely with everything that Gerry Adams said in his speech as well, and I don't find it at all contradictory to the position that we're taking. There's been a lot of debate in terms of the university graduates and who have a vote, and Senator Barrett's right about one thing. People in the north should have a say in terms of the decision making of the Oireachtas, as should our immigrants. And I would be very vocal in welcoming the Constitutional Convention's decision at the weekend, and I would urge the government to put that to a referendum. In fact, I would think that is more important, even because in this symbolism that it would bring. But the universities. This is something that, because you're obviously all politically engaged, but of those who have a vote in the NUI panel and the Trinity College panel, the vast majority of them aren't even registered to vote. Of those who are registered to vote, about 30 to 35% of them actually use that vote. On the panels that I have votes on, the 5 of them, that's comprised of TDs, senators and county councillors, the turnout is almost 100%. There is no other election like it in Ireland. The turnout is phenomenal. And the reason why that is because the Seanad is a tool of the political class. That's what the Seanad is. Make no mistake about it. It is because Pearse Doherty, make no mistake about it, was in the Seanad in order to secure his seat in the Dáil to come the next general election. Catherine Riley, Trevor O'Claherty and David Cullinan, the 3 Sinn Féin senators there, are doing a fine job. I'll have no doubt, no problem admitting, but they're there in order to secure Dáil seats. The difference between them and a lot of the others is that they're not afraid to admit that that's the case. But the Seanad is a tool of the political establishment, and it has no role in a functioning modern democracy.
Now we're going to take one final question, and then we're going to put it to a vote. So we have to do that. It is a debate. Amy.
Sorry, so I just wanted to take the point of view of somebody who's gone out there and wants to vote. Both sides Seanad, and then we will reform the law. And it's like a sort of a promise package in some way of reform. Not only do we acknowledge that local government needs reform, we do, and it probably does. We have to acknowledge that the law needs reform, we do, and it probably does. We also need to acknowledge that the Seanad needs reform, but let's not actually promise to reform that. Let's just scrap it. I just don't see how that is a viable option as a way forward, or an even rational option. I can't understand why our Taoiseach would say something as in so immature and childish as to say, if the country say no, actually, I'm not even going to give them reform. The government in party won't actually acknowledge the voice of the country on Saturday morning if we do say no. And I don't think that's fair. Maybe the government at the time isn't the right people to instigate the proper reform needed. Maybe we need to have some more constitutional conventions and make them over and larger so the entire country can say what we want the Seanad to be. But I think it's pretty clear. We don't want it to be the elitist area it is at the moment. Maybe we do want vocational panels on it. But I just don't understand how the government can just wipe it out like that without actually going down every single avenue before abolition. So just enlighten us a little bit as to why you can just do that right now.
I'm going to put that to Eoghan, and then for a final word on this side as well then.
Thanks, Amy, I think it is, for your question, and I really appreciate the passion that you have on this. I mean, it's something I'm very passionate about too. I mean, I got involved in politics because my primary motivation when I moved home from Vienna to contest the local elections in 2009 was political reform, because I was really sick of what I was seeing going on in our political system at the time. And so it's kind of the main issue that I've been kind of fighting for. But I do respect the fact that it's a process, that things do take time. And when the first suite of government reforms came in, when I was elected in 2011, I mean, we're sitting 20% more of the time, we're passing 30% more legislation. We brought in things like backbench legislation, which I've been able to avail of. 4 pieces of legislation so far. One's at second stage, tax transparency, and about to be agreed by the government. So that's meaningful reform for me as someone who practices as a parliamentarian. But of course I want to go further, and as Catherine alluded to, you know, I wrote a document on this, 30 simple reforms that could radically change the Dáil, and it revolves things like whip reform, better parliamentary questions to the Taoiseach, etc. That's the process that we have to keep on going through. The government recently announced a second suite of reforms that will see things like a new legislative process. So bringing experts into Dáil committees before we've even drafted the heads of a bill. Drafting the heads of the bill, bringing the experts back in again to consult with them, and then moving through the legislative process cautiously and taking account of everything that we want to do. I mean, for me, the question is, and you say, well, we need to reform local government, reform the Dáil, we're doing that. I don't think there's an argument for a second chamber. I don't think there's one type of reform that the no side are putting forward for Reform Seanad that a new parliament couldn't do. Bringing experts into Dáil committees. I mean, you can do that there in a much more efficient way. We don't need paediatricians debating maritime law. We simply don't. I mean, housing a second chamber of experts, I think, is actually wasteful of our time and our resources. I'd much rather see an efficient, modern, single parliamentary chamber with a very good committee system, as we see in other European countries, to do the business that needs to be done by the Dáil.
Lucinda.
Thank you for the question. I mean, I consider the pronouncement that if you vote no, you will be denied the option or opportunity reform. I consider it to be petulant, and I consider it again to be very frustrating. And certainly the feedback that I have had from my friends and colleagues and people in my constituency is that they don't like this sort of my way or the highway attitude. And I don't believe for one second that it's sustainable. We've already had Minister Simon Coveney say that if the voting public reject the referendum or the proposition on Friday, that there will have to be reform. And I think everybody acknowledges that there are significant improvements that need to be made in both houses. And I sincerely hope that it will be a catalyst for reform, and I believe it can be, and I certainly, as a sort of an independent but aligned TD, will be making my case strongly and vocally for that reform. I mean, the reform of the Dáil that we have seen so far is pretty minimal. You know, we have seen some steps in the right direction. I think, for example, the fact that committees have a role now in the appointment of chairs and members of quangos and state boards is a step in the right direction. So there are important things that are beginning to happen, but they are minimal. The idea that sitting longer has made any meaningful difference to the Parliament is just, it's not true. In fact, the colloquial term around Leinster House for the Friday sittings is fraudulent Fridays, because there are no votes, there's no order of business, and the vast majority of TDs, let's face it, are in their constituencies. They're not in Leinster House. So, you know, we have to be a little bit truthful in how we go about the reform that we want to see. I think the committees have a role. Of course, committees currently are completely dominated by a massive government majority. Those of us who've been kicked out of our parliamentary parties are denied the option, the privilege of sitting on committees, voting on committees, having speaking rights in committees, which is absolutely preposterous when you consider that 1/10 of the current Dáil are denied any opportunity to participate in committees in a meaningful way. That's not democracy, that's not reform. So, you know, I think we have to analyse all of this very, very carefully, scrutinise it, and not just because somebody calls it and dresses it up as reform, not just accept that it's reform. And that's a responsibility on all of us in Leinster House, both in parties and outside of parties, in the Dáil and Seanad. My firm view is that a committee system which involves both senators and TDs, like with the legislative process, will have added value, currently does have added value, but will have even more added value when we reform the Seanad. And if we vote to retain the Seanad on Friday, I'm absolutely certain that there will have to be reform of both houses. And it is not in the gift of any government to simply, you know, effectively give a rude signal to the electorate and say, you know, we're not going to do it because we don't like the outcome of the referendum. It's just not credible.
We're going to finish with Senator Katherine Zappone.
Okay.
Then we'll have our...
Maybe just a couple more words to add to what Lucinda has said there. I think, first of all, I think there's other dimensions of the petulance. What a lovely word. Again, as most of you are aware, it was requested that the issue of the Seanad and the future of the Seanad would be put to the Constitutional Convention, and it simply wasn't placed there. And the government gave no rationale for that. So that the people to look at that in the constitutional in the context of the Constitutional Convention, not a possibility. When we debated this Seanad Abolition Bill in the Seanad, there were 31 amendments that were put forward to that bill, many of which would suggest that if the people did vote no, then that would give the government a mandate for reform. All of those were ruled out of order by the government. So again, there was no effort to put Seanad reform before the people. And thirdly, I suppose I'd say in relation to that, if the government did want to fulfill its promise of putting the issue of Seanad to the people, why did they have to do it now? Why not wait for another couple of years when they would implement some of these, try and test some of these Dáil reforms that they're putting forth, see how they work, and then put it to the people? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. We're going to have the summary arguments now. Kevin and then Michael. Kevin first.
Just, I suppose, briefly, at the last general election, 82% of voters supported parties who had manifesto commitments, which included the promise of Seanad abolition. So this referendum is not something new or something that's come at us in a surprising way. I think, as I said earlier, it's an elitist institution, and the reform package that the no side are proposing will only further cement that elitism. There is overwhelming consensus that we should have political reform. What that reform looks like, there is obviously, it's a contested argument. But what would reform look like? Well, in my book, that would include getting rid of and removing outdated, irrelevant institutions, such as Seanad Éireann. That's a radical move. I think it's a necessary move. And I think it's a component of a reform agenda. And that's why I genuinely hope that the people that go out, and I hope they go out in their numbers on Friday, will vote yes to the referendum proposition.
Thank you. Michael.
Well, very briefly, Provost, ladies and gentlemen, we say that the Seanad is part an integral part of the constitutional architecture of our country. It's an institution which has a valuable legislative role. It is an institution which exercises checks and balances on the exercise of absolute power by the government through the control of a majority in Dáil Éireann. The President has powers under Article 27, which will be scrapped by this amendment. The Taoiseach, for instance, has powers under Article 28 to bring in non-TDs as expert ministers. That goes down the tube as well. Under Article 29, the double lock, which was promised to the Irish people, that if they voted for the Lisbon Treaty, which would allow the Irish state to surrender its vetoes in Europe, the double lock that was imposed on it was not merely that Dáil Éireann would approve of it, but that Seanad Éireann would also approve of it. That's going to be scrapped as well. All chances of having votes for foreigners go out the window. For Irish citizens, go out the window if we get rid of Seanad Éireann. All chance of bringing civic society into the heart of the legislature as of right goes out the window if we get rid of Seanad Éireann. All chance that people of the calibre of Mary Robinson, W.B. Yeats and David Norris, who espoused unpopular causes, whose parties, if they were in parties, would have shut them up as effectively as Lucinda was shut up for standing by what she believed, all chance of that will go out as well. The opportunity has come to stand up to the power of government over our Parliament. The way to do it is to vote no. Enda Kenny, although he petulantly suggests now that he will not reform if the people vote to retain the Seanad on the clear understanding that it must be reformed, Enda Kenny would commit political suicide if he continued to resist the will of the Irish people, which is that they have a parliament which is fit for purpose and part of a modern democracy. On that basis, I ask you to vote no.
All right, let's put it. The motion is that Seanad Éireann should be abolished. Those in favour raise their hands. Those against? I think the nays have it. I want to conclude on all our behalves by some thanks. I want to thank the senior lecturer, Patrick Prendergast, who was instrumental in putting this idea forward. Well done, Patrick. I would like to thank the students of the History Society and the College Historical Society for their help in organising the event. I would like to thank my colleagues in the Communications Office and the Secretary's Office and other colleagues in the University as well for the work that they've done to put it together. And I would conclude by thanking our speakers for and against the motion for giving their time this evening. And Patrick reminds me to give the apologies of Alex White, who's been detained at a Cabinet Committee meeting, not by some senator presumably, but he's been detained at a Cabinet meeting and he started late. He would have been here otherwise, so I just want to say that. It wasn't that he didn't think this was important. Thank you very much again and have a good evening.